They were bound to the Thunderstone, and its unchecked power brought on the madness. Their city sprawled on the scars of the mountain, and they grew into something monstrous.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Black Magic Craft. As hobbyists, we're always on the lookout for new ideas. It's this constant loop of discovery and experimentation. But some of the ideas that we try just end up being bad, or at least they don't execute very well. It's never a total waste of time because learning and trying things is always good, but it can definitely be a bummer when you sink hours, days, maybe even weeks into an idea only to find out it didn't work so well. Thankfully, those ideas can sometimes be salvaged by applying them to a different situation or using them in a different way, and that's kind of what happened here. Loot's new line of Kragadur dwarves are corrupted and covered in crystals, bound to the Thunderstone and enslaved to madness. This got me thinking about running an adventure with these sort of models. You have some kind of characters that are covered in these crystals, some kind of terrible curse. But what about the setting? They're underground dwarven strongholds and mines. Surely those should also be covered with these corrupted crystals. If you wanted to make some terrain like that, you'd need a lot of crystals. So I tried to come up with a way to make a bunch of crystals in bulk, preferably ones that had amazing colors and were translucent and detailed and to an appropriate scale, and could be applied to something that's already painted. An obvious choice would be 3D printing them in a clear resin, but that comes with a whole bunch of problems. If you want multiple colors of crystals, that means cleaning out and changing resin and settings on your printer, and that's not exactly the most fun thing to do, so I needed to look for a more hands-on, less technology-driven approach, which inevitably leads to molding and casting. I'd first need to carve some crystals as masters though. Foam wouldn't be great as I wanted very small scale crystals. I'd need something rigid. I went with some balsa wood since it's easy to carve and it wouldn't bend. And I'd be molding these with platinum cure silicone, which can react poorly to certain materials. But wood is a safe bet. Using some scrap plastic rails from model sprues would be another great option here. I wanted to keep the mold as small as possible to avoid wasting silicone. A little plastic cup would be perfect. I traced my safe area for attaching the masters onto the wood circle. Then I glued my carved wooden crystals to the wooden disc, leaving enough space in between them for silicone. The cup got glued to the disc and the bottom cut off so that I could pour in my silicone. I realized that the superglue bond between the cup and the wood probably wasn't secure enough for this pour, so I grabbed some water texture paste to seal it up. Any sort of caulking would also work here. This is just what I had closest to me on hand. I didn't want to use hot glue as the cup was so thin that it might melt it. Once dry, I could mix up and pour my silicone. Once this silicone mold was cured and ready to be used, I grabbed some UV resin. I wanted to avoid two-part resins because of their curing times. Some take several hours to cure, and that just would not be practical with such a small mold. You'd be getting a couple crystals per day. On the other end of the spectrum, some of them cure lightning fast, which would present a problem when mixing in colors, because you could only mix very small amounts at a time. Otherwise, your excess you'd end up wasting a bunch of resin. I needed something that I could mix color into and would stay good as long as I wanted it to stay good and uncured, and UV resin is perfect for that. The problem is that it's very viscous, it's very thick, and it was pretty difficult to fill the mold really well. And plus, going straight out of the bottle and using this very narrow tip to fill the mold worked great. Since the silicone was not tinted, I was able to cure this UV resin in the mold. A UV flashlight would work, but a curing station for 3D printing is even better, as I could blast it with a ton of light very quickly. First try worked out alright, although I didn't fill the mold fully, so I had some missing tips on some of the crystals. And the clear resin looked more like ice than anything, which was neat and useful, but I wanted some color. I used alcohol ink to tint the UV resin just a little bit. I wanted it to remain translucent. This did cause a problem though. How was I gonna fill the tiny mold with this mixture of very viscous resin? I could no longer just conveniently squeeze it from the bottle. The best I could come up with was using a pipette. And this worked, quote unquote, but it wasn't great. The resin was too thick for the soft pipette, so I had to just kind of like awkwardly squeeze it out. This is the point where I started to think, hey, maybe this project is a failure, and that it certainly wouldn't be a way to mass produce my own little bits like I had hoped. They did cure and come out of the mold decent though. Not as clean as I'd like, there was a lot of surface bubbles that didn't look great, but very usable. I kept pressing on and I tried something dumb that I was sure wouldn't work. But I did it anyway. I tried just pouring in the resin, just slop it on, get it in there. No surprise here, the combination of thick resin and narrow deep objects made it nearly impossible to get the mold filled. And it was probably more work than the pipette. I went to find some small syringes to use instead, but I could only find this big flavor injection one. Whatever, worth a try. And I mixed another batch of tinted resin. This time with some beautiful magenta ink. I think a smaller syringe like I wanted might work out okay, but this one was a bit of a gong show. It struggled with the resin and it was just overall a really awkward experience. Plus it sounded like this. It was seeming like the only successful part of this experiment was the clear silicone and UV cure station combination. The actual process of filling this mold was just a huge frustrating pain in the ass. So what does this mean? Well, I sure as hell am not going to be banging out tons of these, enough to apply to large terrain pieces in bulk. That would just not be worth the time and effort in any way, shape, or form. But what if we stopped thinking about quantity and just started thinking about application? Wouldn't these look great on the bases of already painted miniatures? You get a lot more mileage out of them that way. But before I actually try that out, I want to tell you about these models and this week's sponsor. Loot Studios is returning to its Viking fantasy world and expanding within that universe to introduce dwarves to the setting. This journey offers over 80 unique models, divided into 3 clans, each with their own identity and themes. The Craigador clan, whose models I'm working with, are a clan of dwarves who dug too deep and could not escape the madness which bound them to the Thunderstone. There are 2 other clans, one that are fiercely traditional, holding on to the old ways, and another that chose to break from tradition and embrace the natural above-ground world. All 3 clans models are available to purchase starting December 12th. You'll be able to purchase the 3 clans separately or as a bundled set for a discounted price. There will also be an additional discount offered for the first week this release is live. This release is not part of Loot's regular monthly subscription service. Rather, it's a standalone set that anyone can buy. If you're watching this before December 19th, now is the time to jump on and grab these sets at their special first week pricing. I'll put a link in the description where you can find out more info and sign up. Loot models are always a pleasure to print and paint, and an absolute must for any tabletop RPG player. All right, let's give this a go. I have high hopes that this is gonna turn out pretty nice. First, let's get a couple of these crystals broken off here to use. I like the idea that these crystals are kind of coming out on this little sheet here and you can break them off and use them as needed. Now, I don't love some of the fuzziness of the bubbles that are kind of on the outside of these, but that can be scraped off. And the nice thing about that is if you scrape them, it kind of makes the corners sort of frosted, which works as a bit of an edge highlight and actually looks pretty good. This bad boy doesn't have much room for extra crystals, but we can squeeze a few chunky ones in here. I could use super glue, right? What if we just used UV resin? In this case, I'm gonna use a flashlight to set them. Get some gloves just in case. And if you're using UV resin and not talking to a camera, wear a respirator. I'm just gonna do a couple quickly here without it. I got my ventilation running. So the idea is just put a little blob on it, set it where you want. This would be a good situation for extra hands or clamps or something like that. Okay, I got that held in place. Let's hit it with some light. It should very quickly set it. All right, it's all right. Another little guy. Just try putting it directly on there. Obviously you could mix in some color to match your crystals here, but I don't think it's really necessary. If you're using a flashlight, you gotta hold it for quite a while, good 30 seconds or so to stiffen up, maybe longer to get it really secure. I just wanna get these tacked on and then I can throw them in the big UV light to fully cure them. I'm really liking how this is looking, even next to the painted crystals. That bit of variation doesn't look bad. It looks good. See, sometimes when things don't go as planned, you just got to look at the situation from a different perspective. And, you know, there might be a good opportunity for success there. You know, I would have loved to have built a big piece of dwarven terrain covered in these crystals. It would have looked super cool, and I'm sure a lot of people would have loved seeing that. But it is what it is. This is what's come up from this venture, and I don't regret it. So maybe your takeaway from this video and this project is, you know, some information on how to use UV resin and make clear molds. But I think the bigger takeaway is just the lesson of don't worry if things don't go as planned. Don't throw in the towel when something starts to seem frustrating or not be working. See if it has an alternative use. It won't always, and that's fine, but sometimes it will. So certainly not worth the effort for making these in bulk, in large quantities for terrain, but absolutely a killer idea for decorating miniature bases. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have some good takeaways from it. If you liked it, hit the thumbs up button, let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. If you want to pick up some tools or supplies for your own hobby needs, check out blackmagiccraft.ca. There I have my essential equipment page where I list most of the stuff that I use regularly. You can buy it through affiliate links and help support the channel in the process. The best way you can support the channel, however, is by joining the Blackmagic Craft Patreon. I'd love to see you there. I appreciate all the support I get. Again, Loot Studios if you want to grab some of these awesome models. That's it. That's all. Have a happy holidays, and see you in the new year. Cheers. Not bad. Not bad at all.